Hello, everybody. We are live here on Tuesday night at the Dr. Boz Show. We are super excited. I am super excited about the show that my team and I have for you tonight. It is one of those places that all of you click on. When we talk about belly fat, this is a headline people care about. And indeed, it's because there's a puzzle. When you have a figure where the belly fat has arrived, it usually was absent of the memo of why, what happened to you that this belly fat arrived. And when folks try to make it go away, well, there are some specific rules that apply. This is Human Physiology 101. This is an explainable process. It's that most people with the belly fat didn't know what got them there. Tonight, we are going to explore and explain why this belly fat showed up, because there is this lesson when I go to teach it. There is no better playing field than the 21-day metabolic kick when I have 200 students that are showing me their morning fasting glucose, their morning fasting ketones, and they've said, hey, doc, how do I get rid of this belly fat? And they'll use things like a water fast and say, I am being super disciplined. Why isn't this working? And you're going to find out tonight. We are going to explore what those students were doing, what I have them doing in the class that is absolutely outsmarting that belly fat. And this is something that you can reproduce. This is not hard, but we will show you this in a couple of stepwise slides, which I think are going to be some of the best slides I've put together in a while. So tune in and look for that as we do this, this together. I'll tell you that when I show you my numbers, you're going to see that I'm not fasting either, but you're going to see that my results are, I took it right before the top of the hour. So you're going to see a blood sugar of 60 and ketones of 4.1. And I'll tell you, I took those numbers about an hour ago, and my ketones were even a little higher than that. So stick around for learning about what we're doing there. I do want to have just a show of hands that if you have ever eaten a can of sardines, I want you to put a yes or no in that chat. We're going to use this list in just a minute. So please, if you're watching live on this chat, on this episode, tell me that. But even if you're watching on the replay, I really want to know. My husband had somebody approach him over the holidays and said, and they introduced themselves, and we were on a fishing boat. And the guy goes, I think your wife has single-handedly exploited the sales of sardines over the last 5 years. Now, I didn't do that on purpose, but I didn't have a good disagreement with that guy. All right, we're going to use some of these slides, get right to the lesson, and then know that we do have folks sitting on the wings of this stage looking for your questions. So if you have questions relative to this topic, they take those, they help me find them as we get done with the lesson, because I sometimes don't say out loud all the things I should have when I was teaching it. And when you ask the right questions, it helps me shoot cleanup. So thank you, thank you. I just want to notice how few of you said no. So please be brave. Do not be intimidated. Oh, there's one no. Nancy Campbell says, no, I have not eaten sardines. Be brave. Tell me when you haven't had a can of sardines. All right, so I'm going to go over to these slides. So we are going to start by talking about sardines, and I have a few things that I point out when I am looking at the puzzle that patients present when they have belly fat, when they have medical problems, when they have a metabolism that's not working for them. And one of those places is belly fat. The belly fat still wins. But this introduction of doing or stressing a metabolism in a different way is a place where we use sardines. So I have 5 points that I'm going to make. I'm going to make the first 3 before I go through those slides and the last 2 after the slides. The first one I like to point out is that hormones outrank the calories. When I look at folks who've tried to get this belly fat off, the ones who struggle, the ones who write in, the ones who can't seem to get that belly fat to move, they are using a formula that is not applicable to them. Without improving the hormones, this isn't going to work. The slides are going to go through that in a pretty quick succession, and I think you'll understand it better when I do that. But the second one is that hormones outrank discipline. And again, people say, look at how much effort I've put into removing this belly fat. And because they're blind, they're not looking at their metabolism at the time that they're changing things. I don't care how much discipline they put in. You will never outsmart those hormones. You have got to evoke those hormones to allow your body fat to open up. The final thing that I want to show you is when people have low ketones. And when I say low ketones, I'm talking about less than 0.8. Now, yes, ketosis is 0.5, but when you're trying to mobilize fat, you're trying to empty some fat cells, I'm saying you got to get those ketones higher than that. So the most important part of these low ketones is that there's a signal. There's a signal that happens when ketones go high, and it protects muscle so that they are not using muscle as a source of calories, and that the energy that patients feel when they do this, well, nothing compares to a batch of ketones. All right, so let's take a closer look. When people are first entering the ketogenic diet, when they are entering my clinic or even just the classroom that we lead, we talk about the importance of eating fat first. And many of you have given me real life, in real time examples of the fear of fat, that they will say, Doc, I have this high protein. I eat my protein shake. I eat my protein in that chicken breast, and they leave out the fat. I contend there is no better time to address this when you're struggling with belly fat, because the results are pretty easy for me to show patients. When you look at the success of what happens when patients are able to open that, they know that fat matters. Their metabolism that is locked from high insulin, it requires them to eat fat first. So we're going to explain the science behind that, because it sounds a little far-fetched if you're new to this discussion. So here we go. I think I can use this prettier slide, this prettier version. So when you look at this image, when I have a patient show up in the classroom, but also in the clinic, and they have a low vitamin D, they have a metabolic disorder that I can see from across the room. They've got skin tags. They've got acanthosis-nigricans, which is that dirty look on the back of their neck from high insulin. But even when they just have a large amount of fat mass, when I look at them, I see they can't unlock what is stuck in their fat cells. I've shown this slide many times before, but we're going to come back around to this. So when I see the high insulin, that insulin with an angry face, and it's got the the veins in his forehead and growly teeth, that is when the switch to the lock is locked. But when you take that insulin down to a healthy level, or even the truth is, the severely obese, or the person who's got the belly fat who has high insulin, and most of them don't know it, when they do drop their insulin from super terrible, like really high to medium high, what first happens is the mobilization, the unlocking of the fat cells. And this is where those hormones built from fat, this is estrogen, testosterone, vitamin D, cortisol, aldosterone, these are all built from cholesterol. When they are high, or when they are locked in your fat cells and you reduce insulin, you unlock these stored testosterone. Here's another way to look at this. I just want you to point out, this is where the muscle and this is the fat. And what is supposed to be in healthy people, when they don't have belly fat, when they haven't had insulin resistance, this is the little C is for cortisol. That's also built from fat. Estrogen, testosterone, even norepinephrine, which isn't built from fat, but norepinephrine has a huge signal of whether or not you can you can activate the stored energy in a fat cell. And when you're looking at how to help people lose weight, that norepinephrine, which is found far into you could say into the starvation literature, into the extreme fasting literature, when they hit euphoria when they're doing this fast, and healthy people do this. Healthy people can get there in 48, 72 hours. But that's not who's asking me to help remove their belly fat. The people asking me to remove their belly fat, their insulin has moved all of these hormones over to the fat cells. And in the case of even the norepinephrine, it doesn't exist. Like, yep, it will try to activate, but it becomes so low you can't even register that the norepinephrine was effective or it was present. So, all right, so we're going to use I'm going to use this because I really want you to pay attention to this slide. So in this slide, we have a testosterone, estrogen as those two little T's and E's. These are the most common fat-based hormones that patients know about, so we're going to use them in this discussion. And the key to this slide is that in here, you can see, yes, there are testosterone and estrogen, but if I tagged these hormones, they're not just sitting there. The testosterone and estrogen are locked inside, but that is not where, they aren't just sitting there. This cell is alive. Your fat is an organ. It is supposed to be helping you. And we're going to go through what should be happening in that organ tonight when insulin's correct or healthy, and when insulin's toxic or it's been too high, and how when, again, belly fat comes on, nobody gets the memo that says, uh-oh, the rules have changed on how you mobilize fat and energy. All right, so we're going to start here with what I call the cliff notes for what happens inside a fat cell. And I specifically want you to think about in a case where they come in with high carb. Now, in my practice, that means, greater than, 75 grams was what I'd be high carb. If you have greater than 50 grams of carbs, I'd say medium. I don't say low carb diet until they have 20 total grams or less in a day. Now, the reason I'm so strict about that is the people coming into my practice already have high insulin. They have suffered the consequences of it, and it's causing health problems. And they want to reverse it. They want to take this away, but you got a little physiology that we need to teach you before you do that. So I want you to carefully notice what's happening. This is a very big fat arrow, and that big fat arrow is saying there's a lot of glucose or sugar. This is a glucose molecule going into our fat cell. This big fat arrow is showing what's happening with the fat. And those are actually called triglycerides in your body. So again, that fat is going into the fat cell, or triglycerides are going into the fat cell, and the sugar is going into the fat cell. What's the other major sign in this diagram is what's going out. This insulin has affected the fat cell, and it is not able to mobilize that energy. All right, so here's a great diagram that does a little better job of explaining this. So notice over the next several slides that what is Mr. Insulin doing to this fat cell? Because that is the real kicker. People come in and they think, my blood sugar's fine, but your blood sugar is going to be fine for 15 years because insulin's going to take care of you. It's going to shoot up, and you're not going to be told that it's taking that much insulin to do the job that last year or the last few years, it did not take that much insulin. So in a high insulin state, we're going to see, this is a lipoprotein. So this is that cholesterol. When you get your cholesterol taken, if you're doing a fancy cholesterol test, we'll look at lipoproteins, but most of us just get a lipid panel done. And the lipid panel measures, well, how much triglycerides, how much fat, how much cholesterol is in my circulation. Because what should happen in a high insulin state is, it's going to take that cholesterol and it's going to put it inside the fat cell. Again, the fat cell is alive. It is a storage bank that the insulin is high because your body doesn't need extra energy. There's abundant energy. So we are going to insulate the body for future problems with this high insulin state. So everybody's doing their job. That little lipoprotein moves on with the rest of its life. And here comes a few glucose cells, which is also this fat cell. Again, it's not just this absent organ. This is a fat cell that's alive and present and working supposedly for you, but you got to know the rules to how to get to manipulate this fat cell. So here we have the sugar inside that fat cell, and again, the insulin is high. So the problem here is the door on the way out is closed. That insulin says, I am not letting you exit. There's nothing going out the bloodstream for this fat cell. We are in storage mode. We are in storage mode. We are in storage mode. And as you look at starvation, this starvation mode is a frequent option when patients show up to my clinic and say, I have been reading about fasting and I'm just going to fast. And I want to whisper to them, that was a good idea when you were 22 and your insulin was normal. We are currently in a starvation mode where the insulin is, it's excessive, and you didn't get told, your body was not aware that, hey, look at this. We are in starvation mode. The insulin has been high for almost a decade by this point. It doesn't, pop up one day. It slowly rose over the last 10 years. And now starvation, when they add fasting, like water fasting to a high insulin state, the first thing that notices is you're not eating much. So the amount of glucose that goes into the cell is not going to ignite. You still have high insulin. When you look at how much of the fat is being deposited into the fat cells, it's a smaller arrow than was in the previous slide. Why? Because you're not eating anything, you're not moving fat around, and currently you've locked all that fat inside the cell. There are several places where I see this in real time. Number one is your GLP-1s that are taken in people with high insulin states. When that insulin is super high and you add this complete suppression or the block of want for food, the drop in food volume before implementing these rules of mobilization of fat turns into a locked fat cell. Yes, you're right. You're not eating very much. There's not much sugar coming in. Yes, you're right. There's not much fat. And that's not being added to the fat cell. But you have a long time to wait before you can get this fat cell to unlock. And the ticket is what is your insulin doing? Another place is people that use protein only and no fat. I see a lot of this grazing. They show up and just say, I should not be losing, or I should be losing weight. I just snack all day long. And in fact, that's the behavior that I see happening with Ozempic people is they have not been taught a different way of eating. They have not been taught to listen to their body. I mean, there is a signal your body should have been hearing without Ozempic. And it doesn't mean that the Ozempic won't help it, but first and foremost, learn to hear what satiety feels like. Let me pump the rise or prime the pump for those endocrine hormones before you end up on that medication. So as you look at these this case, we now say, well, let's take a look at how a high insulin state applies to this fat cell. So once again, you've got the fat delivered from those lipoproteins and from the blood sugar. It is inside the fat cell. But if another lipoprotein comes along, it's going to ask for, can I put some of this storage in you, Mr. Fat Cell? And that fat cell's pretty full, but good old Mr. Insulin says you got to leave room for a little bit of it. And some of those triglycerides are going to go out the back door with the lipoprotein, and some of them are going to even more populate that. It's going to stretch that fat cell even further. And welcome to the amazing capabilities of our human body. You'll also add a little more sugar if that's going up, but because of the high insulin, it cannot get out of this fat cell. When I look at the lower insulin state, a low insulin state has, the blood sugar is usually lower. So who has a low insulin state? Somebody who has dropped their carbohydrates to 20 or less. You'll notice that we don't have a toxic level. And I would even add just a little bit of flames around this when you are in that phase where insulin isn't perfect, but it's way better than it was last week. And that is the case where, yes, we've really reduced their carb intake. The amount of glucose going into the fat cell is lower because they don't eat very many carbs. There are carbs coming, or there are stored glucose coming out of glycogen in their body, so there's still glucose around. But you'll also see that what they do start mobilizing much more are the triglycerides. Those triglycerides got permission to move because of the lowered insulin state. And then most notably is what happens on the exit stage. You now have a fat cell who, because this insulin is less, the fat cell has new rules. And this is the key component for when somebody's saying, well, how do I lose that belly fat? So if I look at people who are the patients that have lowered that insulin state, they've done things like high fat, they've done things like beef and butter, they've done time restricted eating keto or time restricted eating carnivore. So again, they've just really lowered the intake of carbohydrates. This doesn't always happen on day one, especially if they've had a very high insulin for several years. Again, I think it's a little bit deceptive to have that insulin look perfect, because it's not perfect in this patient. And if you were to go to the doctor and look at those blood tests, we'd still see the insulin higher than it should be. So again, low insulin state, keto adaptation, let us not miss this beautiful word here, sardines. And then we look at fasting, and we're going to tell you the rules around that fasting in just a minute. All right, so here we go. We now have taken our high insulin state to we have left a little bit of flame around that insulin so that you can, hopefully, if you're taking a screenshot of this, you recognize, all right, it is not perfect. We do not have a perfected insulin state by just being on a ketogenic diet for a hot minute, but it is better. And that really is the key for folks that write in for belly fat is I need the insulin down first. So once the insulin's down, here's what happens. That lipoprotein comes along. Those triglycerides say, all right, this is supposed to be the place where I off-put some of this fat that's in circulation. And indeed, some of them go there, and the lipoprotein moves on to find other storage places to put that fat. But the glucose, again, can get into that fat cell, and it'll stretch a little more, add that fat to it. But most importantly, the exit door is allowing the fat to mobilize. Now, in this case, I exited all of this out of here. That isn't what happens in a real case, but for demonstration of saying this is the point. When people say, how do I lose fat? Number one, you have to open the door. This section has to be allowing the exit of the stored nutrients. But when I talk about patients who are able to have reduction of their fat, and then their body reabsorbs that skin, that saggy skin. I was on a interview about a week ago, and I said, yeah, my patients where they are following in my clinic, and we are really watching one at a time. How do you get them to lose the fat in a way where the skin gets reabsorbed, so they don't end up with massive amounts of skin? Well, here's where that happens. This mass in here, this is where all those triglycerides and glucose were stored. But when you exit, when you take them out, and this cell would collapse. So if you just drew this ring all the way around here and said, let's Photoshop that out, and you would reduce the cell to this section here with the mitochondria and the nucleus and the proteins. But because it doesn't have a job to do, this live cell has apoptosis. It has programmed cell death without regeneration. And these nutrients found in here get recycled to the rest of the body, recycled. And this is autophagy. This live fat cell will work for you when you need it. But by lowering your insulin, emptying the fat cell, and then having it sit there pretty useless with nothing to do, that's who gets reabsorbed when they are trying to say, how can I lose the weight in a way where I don't need surgery at the end? So as I look at the summary of this, let me use this slide because I think you're going to want to see all that. So again, fat burning is what we're trying to measure there, right? We know that when insulin is high, you can't burn the fat. So if this is perfect, Mr. Insulin, and I just want to make sure that the world sees this this is, you don't get, it's never zero. But so insulin, unless you don't you have type 1 diabetes, and then it would be zero. But you have this low amount of insulin. When insulin is low in the circulation, we see that your fat cell has an exit, has a big arrow next to it, that the ingredients found in that fat cell is able to exit. The higher the insulin gets, so let's just say that this is fasting insulins that we're talking about here. So if you had a fasting insulin of 20, that's going to have a very tiny little exit for what's leaving that cell. So here's just a demonstration of that. So those fat cells, those triglycerides were found inside the fat, and they end up, how much gets out of it? Not much when you have an insulin level of 0. But I contend there's a much better way for you to look at that. When you look at morning fasting glucose, and I don't mean one check, I mean that you routinely look at what is your morning fasting glucose, you'll find that if your morning fasting glucoses are in the 70s, your fat cells have a big exit window on it. If your morning fasting glucose is in the 80s, you still have a pretty hardy window for exiting those fat cells. When it gets into the 90s, again, it's not 0, it's just really small. You're using the fat that's in circulation. You're using the glucose that's in circulation. So what the heck do you need to empty the storage bin for? And when your morning fasting glucoses are 100 or greater, the amount of fat you're losing is not very much. And I know patients are like, but how do I get it lower? How do I get it less? Well, let me show you that again, starving versus autophagy. Starving is, I use this word when I know that their insulin is high. We get to use the word autophagy when the insulin is, you can say lowered. I had somebody where I said low insulin on a show, and they started reducing their insulin injections because they heard that the lower the insulin, the better they were going to do, but they didn't do the rest of that stuff. So I'm really careful about saying that. Insulin. So it's lowered insulin. Here we go. Got to think what I'm doing here. So it is that autophagy also has a state of higher ketones. And what the ketones do, especially, is to signal that the muscle mass was not an option for nutrients. In starving, the ketones, they trickle. Ketones trickle. And if you are on a ketogenic, if you're trying to say, well, what am I doing? Am I starving or is it autophagy? I would push you to check what's your morning fasting glucose, what's your morning fasting ketones. That little test I did at the beginning of the hour, that's what you do first thing in the morning. And when you have ketones that are 0.3, 0.2, that insulin is fighting you harder than it should. So this is the final part when you're looking for how do you calculate that. Autophagy is looking at the glucose, looking at the ketones, and again, in the American numbers, it's the big number divided by the little number. And when we get that number less than 100, we know that you might be losing weight. But when you get it less than 40, you're a pretty good chance of autophagy. In some of my cancer patients or my seizure patients, we try to get that Dr. Boz ratio less than 20. That is very difficult. Meaning people can bounce there for a hot minute, but to be sustainable at a less than 40, that's a little tough. So I'm going to show you the results of this, but I want to show you a couple. Let's do this first. I was going to show you my numbers. Let me just give. There we go. So this screen here is my Keto Mojo, and you can see over here that it's the last 7 days. I don't know if you can see that right next to my head there. So this is from the last week, and I'm in the 21-day too. And some of these numbers, like my glucose of 100, glucose of 95 there, and glucose of 90, some of them I did after my workout. I know, I shouldn't have done that, but I just forgot. And so so the ketones weren't great, but honestly, there's times where my glucose does look like that. It does look higher than it should. And it's usually times where I have not been metabolically stressing. So now I get my game on, and now this, I think, is so this was today. Let's see if I can highlight this actually. So So this is today at right before the show. But if I go back, I think this is this morning. Yeah, if at 5:45 this morning, my ketones were 3.3 and my glucose was 66. About an hour before the show, my glucose had gone to 63, and then right before the show, my glucose had gone to 60. And as this stress, where I'm no longer hanging out in the 80s, I really have been, I've been eating sardines since Sunday. I have not been fasting, and I have a good metabolism. So when I look at what's doing that? Why do I, after so many years of doing this, having a pretty strong metabolism, why do I have such a robust response? Well, because I'm a human with human physiology too. Let's go back to the slides because I think you're going to see this as I finish walking this out. So again, this chart you've probably seen before. And when I look at the 19 days, it's actually 21 days, but when we look at it takes us a couple days to get everybody pushing the right buttons and then get them synchronized to the My Keto Mojo dashboard. So we have 19 days there. And you'll notice along this side is the glucose, and then you'll notice along this side over here is the ketones. So the first thing we'll see is folks come in, and we're tracking only the morning fasting numbers with this data. This is a summation, an average of all 200 students, and you will see that. I'll show you what this really is. This is the first couple days. This is that first weekend where nobody's watching for a hot minute. And then it's usually right before the sardine challenge. Yeah. And then this is the sardine challenge. All right. So then you'll see they're ketones. They're ketones. And again, this is morning fasting numbers. That's the only numbers we track in this line. And we see that 0.9 is where the average was. People come in with pretty good ketones. Not everybody is a beginner. But wow, do we see that those ketones rise. And even with the little bit of cheat here, not cheat, they just aren't as strict as when they have to check in with their coaches. We start to see this really sharp rise here. This is when they are following the rules of the sardine challenge. To look carefully at what their Dr. Boz ratio is doing at the beginning of the challenge, it is pretty high. And a Dr. Boz ratio of over 200, not much autophagy going on there. By the time we look at the class average at the end of the class, the class's average, that's crazy. The class's average was 38. But if we would just hop to a water fast, so in the challenge, we do a sardine challenge and then we do a water fast. If we would just hop to a water fast before doing this, we would not see the success. We would probably hurt some people actually. When we can watch their morning fasting blood sugars and their morning fasting ketones activate and mobilize their fat, unlock those fat cells. Again, we're not taking their insulin and going back to perfect. We're just taking the flames off. So here is an example of a 72-hour water fast before we activated their metabolism. So here's day one. So this is, again, what changed from this chart to the last chart is you're not just doing one day, you're doing 4 days worth. And so we watch a 72-hour water fast. They're eating a couple of meals times a day. And I'm telling you, those blood sugars are not bad. You're going to walk into a doctor's office and they're like, oh, this is fine, no problem. But what gives you a hint about not having what gives you a hint about this is notice, here's that glucose level of 100, and notice with 72 hours of not eating. This is that part where I said the discipline, the sacrifice that these patients go through to get their numbers down. It's kind of sad. I mean, they denied no food for 72 hours before they go to eat, and they didn't get their blood sugars any lower than that. Here's the other part, is they come in to a water fast thinking they're going to make life better by eating nothing, except they forgot to activate their endocrine system. They did not unlock fat cells before they started. And without anything going in, again, this is their cortisol rise in the morning, so they still have that morning cortisol that bumps, that's normal, but they don't eat anything, and that blood sugar didn't do a great job of dropping. It didn't raise. Okay, good job. But dang, it didn't drop that much either. And you think this is a made up chart. This is an actual patient's chart where you're like, I know, honey, I know it looks very hopeless, but let me teach you the trick. So if we look at a 72-hour sardine fast, so there's that same day beforehand, and now they're eating throughout the day, and they're eating a can of sardines, right? So first thing I want to point out is, okay, so there's this, there's the 100 blood sugar, here's 80, and when they eat their sardines, it's a tiny little raise in their blood sugar. I mean, you think eating always makes your blood sugar do this? No. When you eat high fat, high protein, you still get the pleasure of eating. And I do think there's pleasure when eating sardines. We work on that in the class. But wow, look what their blood sugar does. We are now, under 80 for that blood sugar, right? Or at least maybe the high 70s. But here's the real kicker. So the first day, again, those ketones start out very pathetic, but the activation of the mobility of the fat, we start to open up some of those fat cells, and we have ketones now that raise almost to 1.7 by the time the end of that challenge happens. And of course, the most powerful part that's hidden behind that sardine challenge is their mitochondria got to that autophagy that I was talking about earlier. When we push that system to deliver on the mitochondria or on the energy production, the other part that's happening inside a fat cell, but also inside a muscle cell, is that those mitochondria, you swish out the ones that are not very healthy, and you will generate some fresh new mitochondria. Those mitochondria are going to last for 6 weeks. Even if you screw everything else up, the new mitochondria are not going to have holes in them for about 6 weeks. So you get a boost in your metabolism. Period. Stop. End of thought. That's how you get a boost in the metabolism for 6 weeks because of those engines inside the cells are much better. So here we have a 72-hour water fast. Okay. And that water fast again is after that boosted metabolism from the sardine fast. So my students that are in class right now will have the privilege, spoiler alert, that there's going to be another challenge coming next week. And this time you see, wow, they water fasted after they did this little trick. And we have, blood sugars that are going to be, okay, thank God they're not above 100. But look what that blood sugar dropped to on this water fast. And now, because of that exercise, because of that activity in the first water fast, you actually would probably even see that this, I think this blue line would even be a little higher in them. But of course, the reactivation of even more mitochondria the second time you challenge that body is the beauty of that. So there's 2 case studies that I think are worth going through. I'm going to go, these are real live. These are pictures I've taken within the last 24 hours. I want to show you that, but before I do that, I have a quick announcement that I want to make. Oopsie, not that one. I want to go here. This, I have a really big announcement for well, you can have it for girls too, but for boys. Boys, we have something that your wives are going to want. And how do I know? Because I had patients write in and tell me about this. That for Valentine's Day, which you have 10 days to get your wife something lovely, this oil is my favorite. I made this, I put this together, and this is the only thing I use on my face and on other parts of my body. I was really irritated by how stingy people were with really good cold pressed oils, especially the ones that we know penetrate the skin. So people write in all the time saying, how does your skin look so great? And I tell them, it's from having good mitochondria. It's really from the metabolic health. But then there are some things I do. And one of them is I used to make this oil for all my friends, and now I make it for people that are there on the channel. This will be on sale through Valentine's Day. But I love telling the story about the little man who wrote in and said, I saw you made this oil and I ordered it for my wife. I got it home and she scolded me good and proper. We've been married like 35, 40 years, and maybe it was even longer than that. And she goes, I never put oil on my face. Why would you buy me that? This is what a terrible idea. But then because he bought it, she used it, and she writes in and says, best gift ever. I've gone through the whole bottle and I heard that there's a chance that you might not make any more. So please, please, please make more, because I used it all over me. I had him rub it on my back, but mostly I used it on my face like you do. And I cannot believe how much that changed over the course of the first 2 weeks of the oil. Because at first her face didn't absorb the oil, but by the end of the second week, and I tell this in the instructions, just let it sit on your face. Know that the first few times you apply this, you won't have the absorption into your skin as well as what you will by this end of the second week. And I have some friends who've done some really great research and development for me, where I said, just take a picture of your skin, use the whole bottle and take a picture of your skin. Gentlemen, it's a great Valentine's gift. There's no calories involved, and it's a really great, my husband uses it too, but if you're looking for that gift, that's what I wanted to show you there. All right, so that was the one commercial. We're going to go back to the slides, because I just want to say that this case study, let's make it a little bigger so that you guys can see it. This case study is a patient who I've known for a long time, and her health problems, she does not need to lose weight. In fact, she has a chronic, debilitating health problem where we need her metabolism to be as strong as possible for her to stay alive. She's on several liters of oxygen because the disease she has is in her lungs. And my God, she follows every rule I tell her. But you can see that, here's, January 10th, January 14th, she's following the rules, guys. She is more strict than probably anybody. I mean, just one of the top 10 most strict keto teachers, but students. You'll notice her blood sugars are all in this 100 range. And I didn't ask her what happened there, but here's where the sardine challenge starts. So she starts the sardine challenge, and you'll notice the first thing that happens in her numbers is, the ketones go up. Those ketones rise because she's eating sardines. She's eating 2-3 cans of sardines the first day. And then look what happens. Her disease state does need her to lower her glucose. And I'm telling you, she is doing everything in her power, and her body is under attack. Her body is stressed. There's parts of the cells in her body that do not get oxygenated well enough if there's a kink in her oxygen supply. So, I mean, she is literally fighting for every cell in her body, and we know that she needs to be efficient at how she makes fuel and how she uses fuel. So having this ketone spike over here, her life depends on it. And yet she does all of these things to try and get them to go higher. And this is the one line, right? I want to just give you a little space. This is that same patient over the past year. So let's just take a look here. This is where ketones are 2. So the dotted line, they're lower, but so think of the ketones as 2, and maybe the dotted line, you'd see the ketones as 3. Oopsie daisy. So say this is ketones of 3. All right, guess what happens every time there's a spike that gets close to the 2 or 3? Guess what she's doing there? Oh yeah, you guessed it. She's eating sardines. Okay, she doesn't just do it when the challenge comes about for the course. She's actually one of the coaches that I just feel blessed to be part of her life. Every time she pushes her metabolism and produces ketones, oh, look what else happens. I'm going to use the yellow here. Her glucose goes down. She pushes this. Oh yeah, the glucose goes down. She pushes it again. The glucose is going to go down. This is an advanced physiology equation saying when you change the fuel that goes in, the endocrine system works for her. You say, well, why is she producing all that cortisol? Why doesn't she just stop producing cortisol? Well, her body's trying to die. Cortisol is what's saving her life. This disease process is stealing her oxygen. I can't take that away. And there's times she gets sick, she gets a lung infection, and the doctors give her prednisone. Yeah. Cortisol in a pill. Guess what that does? It shoots her blood sugar up. It makes it nearly impossible for her to circulate fat. She feels really tired because the fuel source when you circulate fat, nothing like when you circulate, the fuel source when you circulate fat is an energy level that when you compare it to leading with glucose, especially in a chronically ill woman. Oh, it's like she has the life around her is muted. The energy is lower. Great teaching example. All right, let's go to the next case. I have one more that I'll show you. Another teachable moment here, where this one, we're going to show you what her numbers were doing for the past month. And again, she is doing her best to lower the blood sugar, getting those blood sugars less than 100. Class didn't start till January 27th. So this is when class started. So she's doing her best to do this even before she shows up for class. And she's had times where she can spike those ketones, and yet they don't last very long. But when she can do that, she keeps those glucose low. So now she gets in class, and those glucose, you're going to see when I show you back for the last 12 weeks, it's hard. It's a real struggle to keep her glucose controlled. She has belly fat. This patient has belly fat. She's trying to lose the belly fat. Guess what we did here? Here's where she started eating sardines. The glucose doesn't change much at first. She's only on that 2.5 days of this. She isn't quite to the 3rd day of the sardines. And look at the rise in those ketones. So I just want you to see that. So the glucose is not changing much. You have to lead with the endocrine system. And the amount of sardines she's eating is not stingy. She's feeling satiated. She's eating them. Here's just a bigger, broader look over the last year. So here's a really good challenge. Guess what she did to spike this? Yes, she ate sardines again. That at times where she can get them to do this sporadically is only. I actually don't think I don't think those was from sardines. I think she was supplementing with the ketones there. The reason I can tell on this patient, who's not nearly as advanced as the last patient, is that when she does use the sardines, let me just erase my scribbles here. When she does use the sardines, this is a time when she's using sardines. This was a time when she's using sardines. Not only is the ketone more sustainable, but then the glucose, this is where she overate after she stopped eating sardines. And that's common. That's a learned skill, how to not do that. My coach, she doesn't indulge. She just lives with it. So I will see that these ketones will rise over the next little bit. And provided we can talk her into this time not doing a celebration meal at the end of her sardine challenge, just doing a normal ketogenic meal, we're going to see probably the best results we've seen for them. So let me just wrap up the last thing. So we talked about how when sardines are used, hormones outrank the calories. Hormones outrank the discipline. I don't care how hard you're trying, you really do need the hormones on your side. So the hormones outrank the discipline. That these low ketones are your enemy. And when you do that, you do sacrifice muscle. If I can boost your ketones, not only do I protect the muscle mass on your body, but it also is a more sustainable energy surge over the next several days. And any of those mitochondria that I change out when you rise with ketones first, which is what a sardine challenge will do. The final two things that I think, according to the way you guys click on and off videos, volume control is a huge part of how we, it's really hard to overeat those sardines. So we talk a lot about what happens with volume control. And again, Ozempic is a great example of pushing satiety, reducing the amount of volume. But when Ozempic is used, yet the leading foods that go in are not sardines, they're not nutrient-dense examples of food, you do not get this endocrine shift. You do not get the multitude of benefits that happen that you do with a sardine challenge. The final thing is the psychology. And what I mean by that is we know that when patients couple pleasure with food, that they're cruising for a bruising. That when the place they get most of their pleasure, that they eat to feel good. Yes, I know eating has pleasure in it. We're not saying you get none. It's that most of the joy in their life feels the pleasure from food instead of pleasure in many other areas. And the first step to addressing that is to decouple that, to take away that you're eating for substance. You're eating not because these sardines are super flavorful, although they're not bad. And that's a learned palate. The pleasure response is so default, is so heavily ingrained, especially in the Western culture in my patients, that they don't even realize how much that's what they are leading for joy until they have a 72-hour stint where this 72-hour challenge doesn't start until the first bite of sardines goes in. The 72 hours ends that on the last hour of the 72-hour challenge, they eat sardines. Yeah, that we push this food consumption, because let me tell you what you don't want to do after you eat a can of sardines. You do not want to have a celebration meal. I promise you, it's real. But decoupling that, giving them that opportunity to say, what does it feel like to not have pleasure from food? Well, that's what you get at the end of one of these sardine challenge. But more importantly, you have just primed your body. Now, if you want to do a water fast while you're kind of percolating with all this extra ketones around and a few new mitochondria, ooh, you're going to have such better results. You're going to have such better results. And training wheels. Don't dive in the deep end. Okay, so I am looking forward to what the questions are here. So let me go over to just reminding you of my my Valentine special. I did see a comment there that I want to respond to, and that is, let me click over here while I get this other thing set up. I really appreciate the people that do just support this channel. The free stuff that I do here is because I love doing this. I think we're doing the best medicine. I know I'm doing the best medicine of my life in the last couple of years because I have the space to do what happens on YouTube. And when you support my business, when you support my team, that we get to do YouTube, that we do not make money on YouTube. I guarantee you we make some money, but that is not paying the bills. What pays the bills is the support of buying the books, sharing the books, buying the products, and allowing us to say, we use that because we like doing this. I like teaching this, and I just need you to hear thank you. Thank you for those that support me. The other amazing thing you could do is if you're watching this and you're all the way to the end of a live hour-long show, and you found this valuable, and you're not a subscriber, shame on you. That is how YouTube rewards us. So please do not be one of those that hides out in a non-subscriber world. That's cheap. My team is depending on you being a subscriber. So thank you. All right, let's get to your questions. Enough commercials. Yes, I know. All right, so Dog Knows, what a great name. Almost can get it. So there you go. Please address non-diabetic ketoacidosis, which is something I've experienced recently on a 3-day water fast, following a 3-day sardine fast. So I would need you to explain what that means, because I think I know what you're talking about, but I don't want to answer that without a little better context. I need you to ask some questions of that guy. So I'll have them do that off screen. Andy says, why do I get nauseous after just 1 day of sardines? Yeah. So, Andy, the truth is, it's the same reason that I got nauseous the first time I tried allulose. There are hormones that our body produces that are made from fat. They are made from healthy metabolisms. They're related to GLP-1. We hear this exact same complaint when we give people a microdose of GLP-1 on a ketogenic diet. They've got fat-based hormones percolating around. Their body's using them. And then it surges. And just like when we give people a GLP-1 or like Ozempic or Mounjaro, Zepbound, we tell them, when you look at what appetite suppression can feel like, it kind of feels like nausea, like I don't want to eat. Now, we don't have, that's like a, not a fun place to be in life. Like, oh, I don't have nausea. Reminds me of being pregnant, right? I don't want to have that feeling. But what is nausea? Nausea is the slowing of your GI tract. And as you slow the GI tract, you will find the signal that the word that comes out of their mouth is nausea. So there are a few things where you can challenge this. And you put sardines in your tummy, especially if you haven't eaten them in a while. Sometimes the bile that you're supposed to produce out of your liver isn't enough to emulsify that fatty fish. Let me explain that. So every time you eat, so every time you chew or masticate, there is a signal coming out of the parotid glands will sense what's the food she's chewing, what's the food she's chewing, and it will start to speak to the rest of the GI tract. And part of that is the signal to the liver, hey, we got some oil, we got some fat coming down the pike, I need you to make some bile. Bile is the goo, the gall that that surrounds fat so that we can absorb, we can digest it. It's a very fun fact. You do not need any bile when you consume medium chain triglycerides. There are specialized fats that you don't need bile for, but most of the fats, like the fats in fish, you're going to need to have bile for. If you don't have a gallbladder, it's okay. The message to your liver is make this much bile. So the production of that is nauseating. Okay, that's what satiety first comes from. Cholecystokinin is another part that is related to this whole cycle of producing bile when you swallow fat. And if you inject cholecystokinin into somebody, well, first of all, their gallbladder will squeeze if they have a gallbladder, but also they feel nauseated. I don't like this feeling. What is this? And it's a slowing of the GI tract is what it does, slow it down. So I'm going to guess that you are 100% normal, Andy, and that you have nausea after the first can of sardines because of an increased production of bile, and that you're signaling the same thing that GLP-1s do, which is slow down and I'm full. So it's all, that's good. All right, let's go to this question over here. All right, Laura writes in and says, please help. I've been diagnosed with lipedema. Now what? So I want you to notice that she says lipedema, not lymphedema. Lipedema is a storage of fat in the extremities usually that it gets stuck. It's really kind of, so when you say locked fat cells, there's locked fat cells by insulin, then there's locked fat cells by insulin plus time and excessive metabolic dysfunction, and that's lipedema. So there are oopsie, that's not what I wanted to do. There are several studies out there that look at how do we help people with lipedema. First of all, you're going to want to be in a ketogenic state. You're going to want to open the fat, the exit doors to all these fat cells. Even with lipedema that's scarred. There's like usually when they take a biopsy of it, there's a fibrous core to most of those fat cells. So not only do you need it to get to circulation, you've got some scar tissue that you're trying to get around. This is where the literature focuses on vibratory therapies. I was trying to think of if I have the one that I really recommend. It's not on my website yet either, dang it. Anyway, there's not all techniques are the same. That's why I was trying to say it out loud, but I don't think it's on there. It'll send people in a goose chase. I'll just stop speaking about it. So massage is another place. Ultrasound can be another place where they're trying to get that fat, those scar tissues, those fibrosis to relax and to allow the diffusion of other problems. Laura writes in and says, belly fat came on during perimenopause, even while keto for 10 years. Why? Well, I would bet, Laura, that what happened to that during that perimenopause is your ketones dropped and your glucose rose. So welcome to perimenopause. As the estrogen changes in the body, as the production of that, it does change the metabolism. Our cells, as women, we burn a better metabolism with estrogen present. When you take the estrogen away, especially during perimenopause, where it goes up and down, whew, tough on women, it can make them more insulin resistant during that time. So you say, well, what was I supposed to do? So stuff like what we do in the 21 day, where we really push people's ketones up to 3.5 during a 72-hour sardine challenge. I'll tell you, it's really hard to do that alone. The discipline that I've seen women go to, and I mean this, like, oh my goodness, months of trying to do the right thing and not getting any return on their investment. When you went through this, there was a ketone meter where you could look at glucose and ketones, and you did a 72-hour sardine challenge, and you can look at this online. There's plenty of places where I write the rules out about this. I guarantee you would have seen a rise in ketones and a drop in glucose. And that's the way you start the motor, right? It's like, you got the lawnmower, you get the string, pull it, boom, you've got the motor going, right? All right, it's going to die if you don't do anything else right. But usually in people who are just trying as hard as you probably tried for those 10 plus years, you got to see a surge in the ketones and a drop in glucose. I mean, I get people all the time writing in saying, why do you fast every week? I'm like, because I'm a girl. I've had 3 babies. I can put weight on like anybody else. But if once a week I push my metabolism, I pull the motor on my metabolism, it's not perfect. I can still put on weight when I look at food, but I do a lot better at protecting myself because, whenever I do that, a crop of mitochondria have just been replaced. And when I'm in this 21 day, I do great. I mean, my blood sugar is 60, ketones of 4.5 an hour ago, says, hey, it isn't a side note. It's a huge amount of repeat, wash, rinse, repeat. And then especially twice a year, like during this class, I do a really good job. I really push my metabolism. And I'm not perfect in the off season, but I'm better than I was 3 years ago before we started doing the class. So I just really think this repetition, the constant reminder that students help me see what it looks like to have advancement in these diseases. I mean, which I've seen in the clinic, but it's just a new shift of looking at the body after that. All right, so we have a follow-up of that one question above. I'm going to come back to that because I do think it's a good question. I'm going to rapid fire some of these. Which hormones cause belly fat? Cortisol would be what most people would say causes belly fat. I would say it's insulin. Insulin's my favorite. You can't have belly fat without insulin. I mean toxic levels of insulin, high insulin. Ange says, have you ever heard of milia outbreaks on the eyes as a result of keto? Help, intermittent fasting and keto hasn't resolved this. You gotta take the 21-day course for that one. I have seen this, but I gotta see your numbers over time in order to say, here's what you're doing. Almost always it's a food volume, meaning, yes, you can make numbers. Now make numbers without oozing fat out of your pores, which is what that is. So usually most people that I see this in, they're my ass over apricot people. They start the ketogenic diet and they go so dang quick that they think their body can keep up with it, and it can't. So most of the time when I see this, I just think, go slower. Double check that you've got the right that you just steadily keep those morning fasting ketones, morning fasting glucose. And then there's some blood tests your doctor should be doing with that too. All right, Jane writes in, at 53 perimenopause, I'll have no belly fat with fabulous Dr. Boz ratios every week. with sardine and water fast. Then I started HRT. Now I have belly fat and a terrible DBR after my fast. What is that? Well, so there are some theories about that. When you add HRT, you do shift things, just so you know. And usually there's probably a transformation that was happening when you started the HRT, that the cells that were very insulin resistant were present. They just was more of them than when you start HRT. You do activate several of those cells before. This would be something where I'd really want to see the numbers for this. I mean, the other part that happens with HRT is it does stimulate appetite. And I know people say, yes, 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 I'm still doing everything right. But usually there's more volume in what they're eating. I mean, the hard part is that before HRT, the metabolism of some of the cells, the hunger was less. So I'd want to see some numbers with that, Jane. Okay, let me go back to do this one thing because we are over time, but I want to make sure to follow up this. Okay, I did a 3-day sardine fast followed by a 3-day water fast. Blood glucose stayed normal in the 60s to 90s throughout. Ketones rose on day 1 of the water fast to 5.5 and then high on day 3. Now, if you hook that up to the Keto Mojo, you can see that yes, it says high above 8, but it's usually somewhere in that 10. The urine pH went down to the lowest measurable level, like a pH of 5, and I was very symptomatic. So symptomatic meaning nauseated, is that what your symptoms were? And then I think we should do it. This is a little too, I'm in the weeds here a little bit, but I'm very curious about this case. Because I would look at, when you look at non-diabetic ketoacidosis, you've got a motor revving and you're not getting rid of it fast enough. So of course you're going to have a pH that's low. You're peeing out ketones. Why are you peeing out ketones? Because you're wasting them. So the low pH in your urine isn't acidosis in your blood. And so I think what you're doing is saying, okay, urine pH went down. Okay, so that is not ketoacidosis. I mean, the other part of a non-diabetic ketoacidosis is their blood sugars are they're in the 200 to 300. So when they get acidotic, well, at least their blood sugars are in the low 200s. So these low blood sugars says, no, you had a spike in ketones. I don't doubt that you felt bad, and I've seen this happen. So if this is what they're talking about, where they have the biggest surge of ketones they've ever had in their body, or at least in short history of their cells, and they really do feel punk. First of all, hydrate. But this is where I was thinking you were going to say was that that to call it ketoacidosis, you need a blood gas that said your blood pH was dropping, and I would bet that a 10 of ketones on a sardine fast in 3 days to get ketoacidosis, you're going to need several weeks that you steadily rise the ketones, at least a 3-week process. I can do some more reading on that. All right, there's a few more great questions here, but I am going to call it a day. Again, I really just want to say thank you for all of you that support us, this channel, and support us on every Tuesday live. I do want to say praise to all the students out there. I am having what I think is it's the best class I've ever run is this 21 days. So thanks for showing up. Thanks for supporting us by watching the channel. Hope you're subscribing, and I'll see you next week, everybody.